Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 1131, Rumors. The middle-aged man glared at the woman upon hearing this before transmitting his voice to all of the cultivators present. Don't speak nonsense like that. That man is a late nascent soul cultivator, and his spiritual sense encompasses a far greater area than you can imagine. What you say next could still be sensed by him. The seductive woman was given a fright upon hearing this and immediately fell silent. The brawny man and the azure-robed man exchanged a glance with one another and also remained silent. The middle-aged man sat in his chair with his head lowered slightly and a cold light flashing indistinctly in his grayish-white eyes. 10 minutes later, the light in his eyes receded as he said, "He should be over 500 kilometers away now, so he won't be able to detect what's going on here anymore. However, it's still better to be safe than sorry." As his voice fell, he flicked a finger and a spot of green light shot forth, disappearing into a thick pillar nearby. The pillar emitted a rumbling sound as faint green light appeared over its surface. The pillars nearby also began to resonate with that pillar, creating a barrier of green light that encompassed the small area within which the four cultivators were situated. "We can say whatever we wang now." The middle-aged man's expression finally eased after doing all that. "You sure are cautious, Marshal Uncle." The seductive woman gave a wry smile. "When dealing with such a fearsome being, you can never be too safe," the middle-aged man harumphed coldly. "Marshal Uncle is right. It's also often the case that cultivators of that level have rather peculiar personalities. If we unintentionally offend him with our words, then our entire sect could be destroyed in a fit of rage. Come to think of it, I can't seem to recall these two among the renowned nascent soul cultivators in our scattered star seas. But that man seems to have extensive knowledge of our scattered star seas, so he doesn't seem like a foreigner. Perhaps he really has been in seclusion for a long time," the brawny yellow-robed man mused hesitantly. Meanwhile, the azure-robed man's brows were tightly furrowed and he remained completely silent with his head lowered. The middle-aged man noticed this and asked, "What are you thinking, Xianxia? I have a feeling that this man is rather familiar, as if I've seen him somewhere before." The elderly man raised his head and said in a slow voice, "You've seen him before?" Everyone turned to him with surprised expressions upon hearing this. "His appearance was very ordinary. Could it be that you're mistaking him for someone else?" the seductive woman asked. "His looks are indeed quite plain, but I'm sure I've seen this man a long time ago. I've got it. His surname is Han, and he was the man who was being hunted down by the Starfall Coalition all those years ago." The elderly man finally managed to identify Han Li. The middle-aged man was initially stunned to hear this before his expression darkened, and he asked, "The Starfall Coalition was hunting down a nascent soul cultivator? Why do I not know of this?" "You're misunderstanding me, Marshal Uncle. At the time, they were hunting down a core formation cultivator, not a nascent soul cultivator. You were away at the time, while Junior Marshal Brother Quan and Junior Marshal Sister Jing hadn't yet reached the core formation stage. As such, Senior Marshal Brother Ma and I were responsible for looking after the sect. We didn't think this was an important matter at the time, so we didn't report it to you. This was close to 200 years ago. I still have the wanted jade slip with me." The elderly man was sweating profusely as he explained. He rummaged through his storage pouch before producing a jade slip, which he handed over to the middle-aged man. "Nonsense. You're telling me this man went from the core formation stage to the late nascent soul stage in less than 200 years. The middle-aged man's expression only grew darker upon hearing this. However, he still accepted the jade slip and used his spiritual sense to scan through its contents, upon which an incredulous look immediately appeared on his face. There was a projection hovering within the jade slip depicting a man in a set of azure robes with a faint smile on his face. It was completely identical to Han Li in every way, and there was absolutely no chance that it was someone who merely resembled Han Li. Waves of shock immediately surged through the middle-aged man's heart. He read through the accompanying message in the jade slip before withdrawing his spiritual sense. A contemplative look appeared on his face as he sat in silence. The three core formation cultivators also remained silent at the sight of the grave expression on the middle-aged man's face. They were waiting for a verdict from the latter. A decisive look finally appeared on the middle-aged man's face as he instructed in a cold voice. "Looks like I really did aim a false accusation at you, Marshal Nephew. The man wanted by the Starfall Coalition really is that man. Listen up. Keep this matter strictly confidential. The Starfall Coalition is a colossal force, but this man isn't the core formation cultivator that he once was, either. I don't want our sect being swept up in their conflict. Otherwise, we could easily be crushed by either side." "Yes," the three core formation cultivators hurriedly replied. The middle-aged cultivator seemed to have gone through a period of extensive contemplation before he delivered a series of instructions. "The three of you are prohibited from leaving the sect for 30 years. Go back and focus on cultivation. I have a really bad feeling about this. Two great cultivators have suddenly appeared and one of them has bad blood with the Starfall Coalition. The scattered star seas is most likely going to be plunged into even more chaos from now on. Tell all of the other disciples to exercise more restraint as well, and tell them not to leave the island unless they absolutely have to. Our sect has to go into hiding for now." The other three cultivators were stunned to hear this, but they could only do as they were told. After that, the three of them left the hall to enact his orders. The middle-aged man was the only one left sitting in the hall. His expression was extremely conflicted and indecisive, as if he were grappling with a difficult decision. After a long while, a self-deprecating look appeared on his face as he sighed. "So be it. Even if he really is the cultivator who obtained the Heaven Void Cauldron all those years ago, and that giant cauldron really is the Heaven Void Cauldron, what does it have to do with me? There are perhaps people in this world who can take treasures from great cultivators, but I'm certainly not one of them. If I were to spread news of this, I would most likely be killed." He then swept his sleeve through the air and disappeared as a streak of blue light. The hall was completely empty again. At this point, Han Li had already left the island and he was naturally unaware of the fact that a mere yellow sand sect had managed to identify who he was, and that the middle-aged cultivator had even managed to determine that he was in possession of the Heaven Void Cauldron. However, this made sense as the fact that the Heaven Void Cauldron had been taken was not well known among normal cultivators, but the news had spread like wildfire among nascent soul cultivators. If it weren't for the fact that Han Li had teleported into the Umbra Realm and just so happened to return to the Heavenly South region thereafter, he would have most likely been hunted down by a bunch of nascent soul cultivators had he remained in the scattered star seas. As for the Starfall Coalition's attempts to hunt down Han Li, that was simply born from the frustration of Zenith Yin and the other old monsters following their fruitless search. They wanted to force Han Li to reveal himself, but he had already left the scattered star seas, so their plans naturally concluded in failure. After the passage of so many years, the events surrounding the Heaven Void Cauldron had already become myths and legends. The order to hunt down Han Li had never been withdrawn, but everyone had already forgotten about it. However, news of the Heaven Void Hall's appearance still quickly spread through the scattered star seas. It turned out that the vast majority of the cultivators who had witnessed the phenomenon on the Bittergate Island were nondescript low-grade cultivators, but there were two core formation cultivators who were passing by and just so happened to have seen a passage about the Heaven Void Hall in a tome they had read. As such, they naturally spread this news. As the rumors began to spread, the story naturally became a little shaky over time. For example, the story about the Ice Phoenix slaying the nascent soul cultivator in cold blood transformed into a version where old Devil Hun had just endured a grueling battle before being slain by two nascent soul cultivators together. Thus, this piece of news was still quite shocking, but nowhere near as impactful as the true sequence of events. In contrast, Han Li attracted a lot of attention as he had been seen manipulating the giant cauldron that was suspected to be the Heaven Void Cauldron, thereby influencing many people to draw a connection between him and the man from all those years ago. As such, many nascent soul cultivators were itching to spring into action. Han Li wasn't even aware that an order to hunt him down had been passed by the Starfall Coalition, nor did he know that most nascent soul cultivators possessed a portrait of him. Otherwise, he would have altered his appearance and traveled in a more secretive manner. At his current power level, he naturally wasn't afraid of being attacked by ordinary cultivators, but he didn't want to draw any trouble to himself either, as that would be a waste of his time. At present, he was flying toward the heavenly star city as a streak of azure light according to the map in his hand. Han Li passed by several islands along the way, and on each occasion, he had exchanged for all of the high-grade spirit stones on the island using treasures or rare materials. In doing so, he had obtained over 20 high-grade spirit stones. Han Li was naturally ecstatic and was even more eager to reach the spirit stone mine. Han Li also encountered many cultivators along the way, but most of them were low-grade ones and none of them dared to get in his way, so he was granted free passage for the entire journey thus far. Among those cultivators, there were only 2 or 3 of the more powerful ones casting confused glances toward Han Li. Aside from that, no one else paid him any heed. Most of them were oblivious to the fact that they had just flown past a late nascent soul cultivator. After flying for over a month, a black spot appeared on the horizon. After flying for a few more hours, Han Li finally saw the heavenly star city in the distance, extending all the way into the clouds, and a smile appeared on his face. Right at this moment, a dozen or so streaks of light suddenly hurtled toward Han Li from the distance. Han Li scanned through these approaching streaks of light with his spiritual sense, and he was rather surprised by what he discovered. The streaks of light were all cultivators, and in the oncoming group, there were 4 or 5 core formation cultivators and even an early nascent soul cultivator. Furthermore, the aura of the nascent soul cultivator struck him with a sense of familiarity, and a suspicious look immediately appeared on his face. However, he chose to remain standing on the spot and didn't take any evasive measures. Chapter 1132. Secret Message. The group of cultivators before him were clad in Star Palace attire, clearly indicating that they had just come from the heavenly Star Island. Han Li was flying through the air without any intention of obscuring his own presence, so he was naturally spotted by this group of cultivators. As such, they immediately flew toward Han Li. However, Han Li had used a technique to completely obscure his cultivation base. Thus, regardless of whether a foundation establishment or core formation cultivator tried to ascertain his cultivation base with their divine sense, they were struck by the feeling that Han Li was like a ball of cloud and mist, thereby preventing them from being able to determine his cultivation base. Right at this moment, a cry of surprise rang out from the group. Han Li's expression changed as he turned toward the cultivator with the snowy white cloak obscuring their features. This cultivator's entire body was enshrouded in a massive cloak, making it impossible for Han Li to determine their gender. Furthermore, even Han Li's powerful spiritual sense was unable to see through the cloak. This was quite a surprising discovery to him. However, the aura emanating from this person was rather familiar to Han Li, and they were the only nascent soul cultivator in the group, so he was naturally determined to find out who this person was. As such, a blue light flashed through his eyes as he attempted to use his bright sight spirit eyes to forcibly see through the cloak. Greetings, fellow Daoist Han. Long time no see, how have you been? However, right at this moment, an attractive chuckle sounded from beneath the cloak, following which the hood of the cloak was lifted to reveal a set of gorgeous porcelain-like features that carried a hint of a smile. Ling Yuling! Han Li exclaimed upon seeing the face beneath the hood. This person was none other than the beautiful Star Palace cultivator whom he had saved all those years ago outside the heavenly Star City. Han Li laid a finger on his own nose as a smile also appeared on his face. To think that you would still recognize me after so many years apart, I feel extremely honored. Also, I must congratulate you on progressing to the nascent soul stage. Ling Yuling smiled as he appraised Han Li carefully, upon which a hint of surprise appeared on his face. He was also unable to ascertain Han Li's cultivation base, but he knew that Han Li's cultivation base was definitely not inferior to his. Upon establishing that, the smile on his face became even warmer and more inviting. You're far too kind, fellow Daoist Ling. Haven't you also progressed to the nascent soul stage? Ling Yuling smiled but didn't reply right away. Instead, he turned his head and instructed in a cold voice. You guys go on ahead first. I have some things I have to discuss with fellow Daoist Han, and I'll catch up to you guys later. Yes, Elder. The other Star Palace cultivators all bowed respectfully upon hearing this. From the respectful expressions on their faces, it could be seen that they were extremely obedient and reverent toward this elder. A hint of surprise appeared in Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, but his expression remained unchanged. Those cultivators continued on their way, led by a late core formation stage elderly man, and disappeared into the distance in the blink of an eye. Ling Yuling turned back to Han Li, and sighed, "Sorry about that, Brother Han. I've received orders to reinforce an island that's being attacked by the Starfall Coalition, so I won't be able to stay here for too long. I've also heard on my way here that the Star Palace is engaged in battle with the Starfall Coalition again. It's no wonder that you're burdened by these duties," Han Li replied in a slow voice. A wry smile appeared on Ling Yuling's face upon hearing this. However, he quickly turned his attention to Han Li again, upon which a peculiar look appeared on his face. He hesitated momentarily before asking, "Brother Han, you've gone beyond the early nascent soul stage, haven't you?" In response, Han Li chuckled and gave an ambiguous reply. "Haha, I've only gone slightly ahead. With your aptitude, it's only a matter of time before you exceed your current cultivation base." Ling Yuling's expression faltered slightly upon hearing this as waves of shock churned through his heart. It was incredible to him that Han Li had already become a mid-nascent soul cultivator. It had only been less than 200 years since they had last met, yet Han Li had progressed from the core formation stage to the mid-nascent soul stage. That was simply unheard of. After a brief stunned silence, Ling Yuling finally managed to recompose himself, but his expression was still filled with envy as he said, "Looks like you really are an extraordinary prodigy, Brother Han. To think that you've been able to make such drastic improvements in such a short time, I'm truly in awe." "I'm no prodigy, I've simply been lucky and encountered many opportunities," Han Li gave another ambiguous reply. Ling Yuling didn't linger any further on this topic. Instead, a smile appeared on his face as he asked, "Is there something you want to do here, Brother Han? I'd be happy to offer my assistance if required. I'd like to take a trip to the outer star seas, so I was hoping to be able to use the Star Palace's teleportation formation." Han Li didn't try to hide his intentions. "If that's the case, then it's a good thing that you ran into me, Brother Han. Due to the fact that we're trying to guard against Starfall Coalition cultivators infiltrating the palace from the outer seas, most of the teleportation formations leading to the outer seas have been shut down. There are only 2 left that are currently in use. I'll give you a badge and with it, you'll be granted access to the teleportation formations." Ling Yuling gave Han Li a gentle smile and he appeared to be completely identical to an exquisite beauty. However, the way in which he spoke and acted wasn't feminine in the slightest. The combination of the two presented a unique and indescribable allure. At his current cultivation base, Han Li was naturally immune to the effects of Ling Yuling's beauty. Furthermore, he was confident that he would be able to take care of the guards and restrictions standing between him and the teleportation formations he wanted to access. However, it was always a good thing to be able to avoid such troubles and hindrances. Thus, Han Li accepted the badge with a smile. The two of them chatted for a while longer before Han Li bade farewell to Ling Yuling, transforming into a streak of azure light as he hurtled toward the massive island in the distance. Ling Yuling looked on in the direction that Han Li had disappeared in, and the smile on his face gradually faded. He lowered his head and contemplated momentarily before suddenly patting his storage pouch to produce a silver voice transmission talisman. He said something in a low voice into the talisman before raising his hand into the air. The talisman transformed into a ball of light before disappearing into space. After doing all that, Ling Yuling heaved a faint sigh with a resigned expression before putting on his hood again. He then transformed into a streak of light in pursuit of his subordinates, who had gone on ahead. After Ling Yuling had flown away into the distance, a silver light flashed in the air nearby as an azure figure emerged from thin air. He turned toward the direction that the voice transmission talisman had flown away in before disappearing once again. 10 minutes later, at a certain location several tens of kilometers away, there was a man hovering in the air. This man was none other than Han Li himself. He currently had his hands clasped behind his back and was completely expressionless. A humanoid figure suddenly flashed before him, upon which his puppet appeared. It raised a hand to reveal what appeared to be a fiery snake scrambling over his palm. However, it was sealed within a ball of silver light and was unable to escape. Han Li raised an eyebrow before reaching out to grab the fiery snake. The latter immediately exploded on its own, transforming into a ball of raging fire. Han Li quickly scanned through the fireball with his spiritual sense, upon which a dark expression appeared on his face. A cold light flashed through his eyes before he abruptly brought his 5 fingers together, crushing the fireball as he did so. He turned toward the massive island upon which the Heavenly Star City was situated, and his eyes narrowed. So everyone in the scattered star seas knows that I have the Heaven Void Cauldron. Looks like I'll need a disguise, Han Li murmured to himself. His face was then abruptly enshrouded under a layer of light, making his facial features blurry and indistinct. At the same time, a series of crackles and pops rang out from all over his body, instantly making him around a foot taller. A short while later, he had transformed into a burly man with a dark complexion. He put away his puppet and flew toward the Heavenly Star City. Unbeknownst to Han Li, in the instant that he had crushed the voice transmission talisman, someone sitting in a dim underground cave of the Heavenly Star City's sacred mountain was alerted to what he had done. The humanoid figure abruptly rose to his feet before feigning a grabbing motion. Spots of fiery light then began to appear in the air nearby before converging to form the very same fireball that Han Li had just crushed. The humanoid figure scanned through the information in the fireball with his spiritual sense before flipping his hand over, upon which the fireball instantly disappeared. What's going on? Why is Yuling using voice escape talisman we gave him? These talismans are very rare and he wouldn't use them for no good reason. Did something happen to him? He's only just left the Heavenly Star City. A voice suddenly sounded from another corner of the cave. The voice was very pleasant and enticing, and it sounded as if a young woman had just spoken. He's fine. It's just that he encountered a rather interesting person nearby and alerted us of this. He wants us to try and recruit this man to our side, the first humanoid figure replied. However, his voice was a little slow and stiff, as if he didn't speak very often. Oh, who is it? It's not often that Yuling develops an interest in anyone. The woman's heart was immediately put at ease upon learning the fact that Ling Yuling was not in danger. As such, she began to develop a curiosity toward this interesting person in question. You still remember what happened with the Heaven Void Cauldron over 100 years ago, right? Of course I do. Does this person have something to do with the cauldron? The woman asked with a hint of surprise in her voice. The man who had taken the cauldron right under the noses of Man Huzi and Wn Tianming is actually the same person as the cultivator who saved Yuling all those years ago. Now, he has arrived outside our Heavenly Star City and wants to use our teleportation formation to get to the outer seas. Yuling just so happened to bump into him on his way here, the man explained. I see. If I recall correctly, this man's surname seems to be Han, and he was only a core formation cultivator back then. How is he worth recruiting? The woman was rather perplexed. You might not believe this, but Yuling suspects that this man has already become a mid-nascent soul cultivator. If that really is the case, then this man is truly an extraordinary talent, the man chuckled. The woman seemed to be very familiar with the situation in the Great Jinn, and she immediately said, when the Heaven Void Cauldron was first taken from the Heaven Void Hall, we had sent people to investigate the person who had obtained the cauldron. Didn't they determine that he was most likely a foreign cultivator who went back to where he had come from after the event? Could it be that he's a cultivator from a certain major sect in the Great Jinn? Otherwise, even if he is an extraordinary prodigy, without the support of a large sect, there's no way he would be able to become a mid-nascent soul cultivator in such a short time. Chapter 1133, Divine Essence Fused Light. Regardless of whether he's a great Jinn cultivator or not, the fact that he was able to take the Heaven Void Cauldron is a sufficient indication of his powers. If it weren't for the fact that the Divine Essence Fused Light we cultivated rejects treasures of the 5 elements, and that Heaven Void Map Fragment doesn't work for late nascent soul cultivators, how could the spirit treasure have fallen into the hands of a foreign cultivator? A forlorn look appeared on the man's face. However, a wry smile appeared on the woman's face upon hearing this, and she said, full mastery of the Divine Essence Fused Light would allow us to use the power of the 5 elements, so how could we have been unable to secure a treasure of the 5 elements? We can only blame ourselves for missing out on this opportunity. After a prolonged silence, the man said in an apologetic voice, "Indeed. If I had known this was going to happen, I wouldn't have dragged you along with me to cultivate this divine essence-fused light. This is my fault." The woman shook her calmly, and said, "It's not your fault. If we hadn't tried to find a shortcut, we would have never been able to progress to the deity transformation stage. As things were, if it weren't for that hiccup in the final juncture, you and I would have successfully progressed to the deity transformation stage already. At the very least, our lifespans would have been prolonged by over 1,000 years. Indeed. Who would have thought that a 5-element spiritual root was required to cultivate the divine essence-fused light to the final stage? If someone were to truly possess such a spirit root, they most likely wouldn't even be able to reach the foundation establishment and core formation stages, let alone the nascent soul stage. How would they be able to cultivate this divine essence-fused light? It's no wonder that this cultivation art had been created so long ago, but no one has ever been able to successfully cultivate it. I was able to reach the late nascent soul stage within 500 years, and in my opinion, my cultivation aptitude is definitely not inferior to the past masters of the Star Palace. I even managed to resolve the so-called 3 insurmountable hurdles to cultivating the divine essence-fused light, but never did I think that I would suffer a fate like this. The ancient cultivator who invented the divine essence-fused light was clearly intentionally setting up a trap for people to fall into. I don't know what his intentions were to create such a self-contradicting cultivation art. If I had known about all this in advance, I would have never dabbled in this accursed cultivation art. The man's voice was becoming more and more worked up as he spoke, clearly indicating that he was extremely resentful toward the creator of this divine essence-fused light. The woman heaved a long sigh. After a brief silence, she offered some words of consolation. "So be it. Regardless of whether this cultivation art was invented as a joke by that ancient cultivator, it's a good thing that we discovered these things in the nick of time and didn't continue down that path. Otherwise, if we had continued to cultivate on the essence-fused mountain, the power of the 5 elements within our bodies would have imploded and we would have died. Come to think of it, we have to thank the arch-saint of the 6 paths and WN Sangu. If they hadn't forced us out of our seclusion early, we would have never noticed these things. HMH, those 2 are just not worthy of a mention. If it weren't for the restriction of the essence-fused mountain, I would have stormed their base and killed all of them long ago. Furthermore, this problem is not one that cannot be resolved." The man's voice became a little peculiar as he spoke. "What do you mean by that? Have you really found a way to change our spirit roots?" The calm woman also couldn't help but get excited upon hearing this. After a brief hesitation, the man revealed, "Ever since we discovered this issue, I've been reading through all types of ancient tomes in the past century, trying to find a way to overcome this problem. During the process, I discovered an ancient spiritual power that we could use. The technique can't change one's spirit root completely, but it does involve putting a pure attribute treasure through a blood sacrifice, thereby using it to replace the missing spirit root in order to gain control over the power of the 5 elements. It's that simple." The woman was shocked to hear this. Of course, there are certain conditions that must be fulfilled with regard to the sacrificial process and the treasure used, but those aren't problems to us. Most importantly, this method can only grant us control over the power of 1 element, but we won't be able to sacrifice a second treasure. Otherwise, our nascent souls would be unable to handle the influx of power and our physical bodies will also crumble due to backlash. As such, unless we possess 4 attribute spirit roots in the first place, this method won't work for us, the man said in a resigned manner. "I see. Then it really is completely useless to us as we only have 2 attribute spirit roots." The woman's heart sank upon hearing this. The flames of hope that had just ignited in her heart were doused once again. So be it. We should stop being so fixated on mastering the divine essence-fused light. Even if there were other ways to resolve this issue, there's not enough time for us given our remaining lifespans of less than 100 years. Let's focus more on Yuling. After our combined efforts, she has finally progressed to the nascent soul stage. Once her cultivation base is fortified in a few more decades, we'll inject him with our power to forcibly take him to the mid-nascent soul stage. In that case, with his mid-nascent soul stage cultivation base, he should be ready to take over the Star Palace. Of course, We have to get rid of the Archsaint of the Six Paths and WN Sangu before that. The woman's voice suddenly turned extremely cold and forbidding at the mention of these two enemies. It won't be a difficult task for us to get rid of those two as long as we put our lives on the line, the man said nonchalantly. What do we do with that cultivator with the Han surname? He possesses the Heaven Void Cauldron and he might be a mid-nascent soul cultivator. If you and I were to leave this world someday, he could prove to be an extremely volatile element in the scattered star seas. From the tone of Yuling's voice transmission, she seems to have a rather good impression of him. The woman was quite hesitant. He's a mid-nascent soul cultivator with exceptional aptitude. He really is worth recruiting if possible. We'll see if he wishes to join our Star Palace. If he does, then everything will be smooth sailing from there. We'll set up a restriction to take his Heaven Void Cauldron for Yuling to use when making a breakthrough to the mid-nascent soul stage, and we'll give him some other treasures as compensation. If he's unwilling to join us, then we'll just have to kill him. The man's voice had become extremely cold. That seems to be the only way. The woman heaved a faint sigh, but stated no objections. However, this voice escape talisman's has already been destroyed once, so he must be aware that we're onto him. Ordinary elders won't be able to subdue him, so it looks like we'll have to make a trip in person, the man said in an indifferent voice. Even if he possesses a spirit treasure, he's just mid-nascent soul cultivator. It won't require both of us to subdue him. I can take care of him myself. On the divine essence-fused mountain, he definitely won't be a match for me even if he's a late-nascent soul cultivator. The woman was very confident in her own abilities. All right, that works too. You have to be careful, though, that Heaven Void Cauldron is not something to be scoffed at. The man didn't object to this course of action. As long as it's a treasure of the 5 elements, its power will be severely debilitated in the face of my divine essence-fused light, so what are you worried about? The woman chuckled nonchalantly. This time, the man in the cave didn't reply. He had clearly acknowledged what the woman was saying. At this moment, Han Li had already arrived at the Heavenly Star City. The city really did live up to its name as the #1 city in the scattered star seas. Han Li was able to easily secure the missing materials from the markets here. He also sold a few treasures that were useless to him, earning him a large amount of spirit stones in the process, before settling down in an inn. Seeing as Ling Yuling was already aware of the fact that he possessed the Heaven Void Cauldron, he naturally wasn't going to head straight to the Sacred Mountains teleportation formation with that badge. Instead, he was going to infiltrate the Starry Sky Palace at night. If it weren't for the fact that the Heavenly Star Sages were guarding the teleportation formations, he naturally wouldn't be wary of the guards there. Of course, if this legendary pair really did appear, it would be yet to be seen whether they'd actually be able to stop him. In order to attract the least amount of attention, he intentionally chose a small inn and briefly revealed a mid-core formation stage cultivation base. As such, the Qi condensation in manager was naturally extremely respectful toward Han Li, offering him the best room in his inn. That night, Han Li snuck out of the inn without anyone noticing. He could still clearly recall the location of the Starry Sky Palace and he shot forth directly toward the place where it was situated on the massive mountain. Along the way, most of the guards he encountered were at the Qi condensation and foundation establishment stages. There was the occasional core formation cultivator as well, but Han Li was still able to easily sneak past them. He arrived at the 50th level of the sacred mountain in the blink of an eye, upon which the massive palace appeared before him. The passage of time hadn't left any signs on the palace. It was completely identical to how it had been in the past. A sense of nostalgia welled up in Han Li's heart, and just as he was about to unleash a secret technique to break through the restriction on the door, his expression suddenly changed as he abruptly disappeared. A short while later, a few indistinct humanoid figures arrived soundlessly from another direction. Their bodies were rather blurry, almost completely blending into the night. Without careful examination using one's spiritual sense, it was impossible to notice them. Who are these people? Are they from the Starfall Coalition? Han Li looked on with a hint of surprise and curiosity in his heart. These human cultivators could already be considered to be quite powerful. Among them, there were 4 foundation establishment cultivators and 2 core formation cultivators, but there was also a 3rd or 4th layer Qi condensation cultivator with them. All of their faces had been obscured by a layer of grey Qi, as if they were trying to hide their appearance from prying eyes. However, the two core formation cultivators leading the way clearly consisted of a man and a woman. Han Li immediately lost interest upon making the discovery that there were no nascent soul cultivators among them. As such, he couldn't be bothered to use his spiritual sense to determine what these people looked like. All he did was stand still in midair, looking on with his arms crossed. These people approached the door to the Starry Sky Palace in the blink of an eye before stopping in unison. One of the core formation cultivators suddenly flipped his hand over, upon which a green formation plate appeared over his palm. He gently cast a celestial technique on it, and the formation plate began to emanate faint white light. The other core formation stage woman also flipped over her hand to produce a small yellow flag. She waved it through the air, and a cloud of yellow mist rapidly wafted forth from the flag, instantly enshrouding their group within. Immediately thereafter, the cloud of mist and that group of people all disappeared. Han Li faltered slightly before a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes at the sight of the yellow flag. Chapter 1134. Interception. He felt as if he had some recollection of that formation flag. He seemed to have possessed a treasure like this once upon a time, but had since given it to someone else. However, that wasn't a cause for alarm. 4 low-grade treasures like this, as long as one had mastered the refinement method, refining an identical one would be an easy task. Even so, Han Li had still developed an interest in that core formation stage woman. Their group had seemingly disappeared into thin air, but such a mediocre concealment technique was completely useless in the face of Han Li's spiritual sense. Thus, a blue light flashed through his eyes, immediately piercing through the layer of grey qi obscuring the woman's face. That's... A peculiar instantly appeared on Han Li's face. Right at this moment, 2 streaks of light, one azure and one yellow, shot forth from the Starry Sky Palace. A certain restriction seemed to have been triggered, and the sound of footsteps erupted from behind the palace doors, following which a white-robed cultivator slowly emerged from within. This was a tall and thin man who appeared to over 40 years of age. He wore a slightly dark expression on his face and was a core formation cultivator. This man was clearly the Star Palace cultivator tasked with guarding this palace. He emerged from the palace and looked around, only to discover that there was no one in the general vicinity. Upon making this discovery, his expression darkened further with a hint of displeasure on his face. Yellow light flashed, and that core formation stage man from earlier voluntarily showed himself. The grey qi over his face also faded, revealing a set of graceful and refined middle-aged features. The man cupped his fist in a salute as he asked in a respectful voice, "Brother Zhong, have there been any mishaps? Will my wife and I be able to teleport away tonight?" "Fellow Daoist Qian, as long as you have enough spirit stones with you, teleporting your group away is naturally just a piece of cake. All of the guardians of the teleportation formation have done the same thing at some point. Are you worried that I would go back on my word and refuse to grant you access to the teleportation formation?" The Star Palace cultivator's expression eased after the man appeared, but he still spoke in a rather cold and impolite tone. "Of course not. I have absolute trust in you, Brother Zhong. It's just that my daughter really has fallen seriously ill, and we have to head out to the outer seas to find the white young demon fish's demon core to save her life. The situation is extremely urgent and we can't afford to be delayed," the graceful man said with a smile. He then waved his hand toward a certain direction behind him. A spluttering sound was heard, following which a ball of yellow mist dissipated, revealing the remaining members of the group. The Foundation establishment cultivators had all revealed their faces, leaving only the female core formation cultivator and a thin and frail female qi condensation cultivator with their faces still concealed under grey qi. "This must be your wife. I've heard much about you, Moon Maiden." The Star Palace cultivator completely ignored the other Foundation establishment cultivators as his attention was drawn to the female core formation cultivator. His gaze scanned across her face several times, and he even put on a rare smile for her. "Thank you for doing this, fellow Daoist Zhong. I am forever grateful to you." The female cultivator's voice was very gentle and delicate, yet she spoke in a manner that was neither haughty nor humble. "It's a shame that Moon Maiden refuses to show your face here. I must say, I'm a little disappointed. Come with me. The Star Palace cultivator chuckled as a slightly wistful look appeared on his face. However, he then immediately turned and strode into the palace. The graceful man exchanged a glance with that female core formation cultivator, before also entering the palace with the chi condensation stage woman sandwiched between them. The 4 foundation establishment cultivators were clearly their disciples, and they also hurriedly rushed in pursuit of their masters. Of course, none of the cultivators noticed that an azure light suddenly flashed outside the palace again. In the instant right before the restriction was reactivated, a faint figure, whom they were completely unable to detect with their cultivation bases, strode in along with them. The figure moved in a completely soundless and stealthy manner, as if he were nothing more than a wisp of smoke. After passing through a convoluted system of corridors, everyone arrived in a hall, within which were many teleportation formations. There was an elderly man with a face as tender as that of an infant waiting inside. Once the group of people walked in, a cold light flashed through the elderly man's eyes before instantly receding again. That's everyone, right? 7 people is just the right number for a single batch, the elderly man remarked indifferently. Indeed, they are the fellow Taoists wishing to be teleported away this time. Fellow Daoist, which island would you like to travel to? The Star Palace cultivator answered the elderly man's question first, before turning to inquire the man behind him. We'll go to Silver Shark Island. Due to the fact that a high-grade minute was discovered there, most of the cultivators in the outer seas have gone to that island. Perhaps we'll be able to find a white young demon fish's demon core there, the man replied after a brief hesitation. At the same time, his gaze swept over the row of teleportation formations before settling on one of the formations. Brother Huang, deactivate the restriction on that teleportation formation. Fellow Daoist, it's time for you to pay up, the Star Palace cultivator said to the graceful man expressionlessly. Of course. After the elderly man cast a few celestial techniques to withdraw the barrier of white light around the teleportation formation, the graceful man's heart danced with elation. He immediately pulled off a storage pouch hanging from his waist and tossed it to the Star Palace cultivator. The latter caught the pouch and scanned through its contents with his spiritual sense, upon which a content expression appeared on his face. The amount is just right. Here, these are you teleportation talismans. After verifying the number of spirit stones in the storage pouch, the Star Palace cultivator didn't delay any further as he pulled out 7 teleportation talismans. The graceful man accepted the teleportation talismans before distributing 1 each to everyone in his group. They were then led by the Star Palace cultivator toward the teleportation formation that his gaze had rested on before. This teleportation formation was already shimmering with faint white light and everything appeared to be normal. You sure have some guts. How dare you teleport people away to the outer seas behind my back? Are you not afraid that the enforcement hall will put you through the torture of the lightning whips? All of a sudden, an enticing female voice erupted. The voice wasn't very loud, but it exploded like claps of thunder in the hearts of all of the cultivators present. The Star Palace cultivator and the elderly man's faces immediately turned deathly pale. The graceful man and the female core formation cultivator were momentarily stunned before abruptly turning around. Light erupted from their bodies, wrapping up the frail female chi condensation cultivator in a cocoon of light before the 2 of them transformed into streaks of light, 1 red and 1 blue, as they hurtled directly toward the teleportation formation. A cold harumph rang out. A vibrant streak of light suddenly flew through the air from one corner of the hall, appearing in front of the formation in the blink of an eye. Spiritual light swept through the air, swatting the blue and red streaks of light aside with ease. The 2 streaks of light were sent flying for 70 to 80 feet before dissipating, revealing the disheveled figures of the graceful man and the female core formation cultivator. Both of them had also turned deathly pale and they opened their mouths in unison to throw up mouthfuls of blood essence. In contrast, the chi condensation stage woman that they strove to protect was completely unscathed. At this moment, the grey chi obscuring the faces of the 2 women disappeared at the same time, revealing their true features. The female core formation cultivator appeared to be around 25 or 26 years of age with skin as fair and fine as warm jade. She was an exquisite beauty. The chi condensation stage woman beside her appeared to only be around 15 to 16 years of age with a sickly yellow pallor and an extremely thin figure. However, Upon closer inspection, one could see that her features bore a startling resemblance to those of the female core formation cultivator. Furthermore, her eyes were as clear as water, and even in such a dire situation, there wasn't much panic or alarm on her face. "We pay our respects to the palace master." The two-star palace cultivators were completely petrified after seeing that streak of light, and they immediately fell to their knees. The two core formation cultivators glanced at each other upon hearing that, and both of them could see their own shock mirrored in one another's eyes. They were initially holding on to some hope that they would be able to escape from this woman, but that hope had been completely dashed. They stood rooted to the spot, unable to even muster up the courage to flee. Right at this moment, light flashed in the corner as a lithe and graceful figure emerged before hovering toward the center of the hall. This was a white-robed woman wearing a white scarf that obscured half of her face. Her eyes were as bright as stars, and her brows were thin and long. This was clearly another stunning beauty. However, this woman didn't even look at the cultivators gathered around the teleportation formation. Instead, she turned her attention toward the entrance of the hall, and said, "Fellow Daoist Han, why are you sneaking around in the presence of these juniors? Would you be so kind as to reveal yourself and have a chat with me?" Her words immediately sent waves of shock surging through the hearts of the other cultivators present, and they all turned toward the direction she was facing in unison. In their eyes, there was nothing but empty space there. How could there possibly be anyone there? Just as everyone was caught in a state of suspicion and bewilderment, a gentle chuckle was suddenly heard from that spot. "I didn't think that I would encounter one of the heavenly star sages here. You didn't come here just to meet me, did you?" As soon as that voice fell, azure light flashed and an azure-robed cultivator emerged from thin air. He had his hands clasped behind his back and was looking at the woman before him with a hint of a smile on his face. This man was none other than Han Li. The woman scanned over Han Li's body with her spiritual sense, upon which her expression changed drastically. A wave of incredulity swept through her bright eyes as she exclaimed, "Late nascent soul stage." This woman was naturally the woman in the cave of the sacred mountain. Everyone else in the hall was flabbergasted to hear the words "late nascent soul stage." Half of them were core formation cultivators, but encountering a nascent soul cultivator was still a rare opportunity for them, and encountering a late nascent soul cultivator was something that almost never happened. However, not only had one of the heavenly star sages just revealed herself to them, another unknown late nascent soul cultivator had also appeared. This made everyone feel as if they were stuck in a dream. Among those cultivators, the core formation stage woman referred to as Moon Maiden was more stunned than everyone else to see Han Li. Her mouth gaped open in shock, and when she heard that Han Li had become a late nascent soul cultivator, she was completely rooted to the spot in astonishment. Under normal circumstances, her reaction would have drawn the attention of the people beside her. However, all of the cultivators were completely focused on these two late nascent soul cultivators, so no one had the spare mental capacity to pay any heed to her reaction. Funnily enough, the young Qi condensation stage woman was the first and only one to notice her stunned expression. Due to the fact that her cultivation base was pitifully low, the core formation and nascent soul stages were too far beyond her to evoke any reaction within her. After taking in the core formation stage woman's reaction, she couldn't help but take a curious glance at Han Li. "Are you really Han Li?" The heavenly star sage's calm and collected expression had already faded, and was replaced by a particularly grave one. "Do you think you were waiting for the wrong person this entire time?" Han Li didn't give a direct reply. Instead, a smile appeared on his face as he looked at the woman before him. Chapter 1135. Wariness. The masked woman was looking right back at Han Li without showing any weakness, but there were waves of shock surging through her heart. She had thought that Han Li would be easy prey for her to capture, only to discover that he was far more powerful than he anticipated. As such, she was starting to become rather hesitant. With the assistance of the Divine Essence-fused light and the Divine Essence-fused mountain, she was confident that she would have at least a 70% chance of victory if a battle were to ensue. However, it would be close to impossible for her to kill or capture Han Li on her own. If she were to do so, there was a good chance that Han Li would be able to escape, and thereafter, the Star Palace would have earned itself a late nascent soul stage enemy. Thus, even as one of the heavenly star sages, she didn't dare to act rashly in this situation. As such, both Han Li and the woman fell silent. The entire palace was immediately enshrouded in a suffocating atmosphere that struck one with a sense of asphyxiation. All of a sudden, Han Li's expression darkened as he raised his hand and feigned a grabbing motion. Spiritual light immediately flashed as a large azure hand emerged. The hand flew through the air like lightning, plucking a streak of fiery light out of thin air before clamping it firmly within its palm. The masked woman raised her eyebrows upon seeing this, and a hint of surprise flashed through her eyes. "I'd advise you not to go sending out voice transmission talismans, fellow Daoist. I don't want to be attacked by two cultivators of the same cultivation base as mine at the same time. As far as I'm aware, I haven't done anything to offend the Star Palace, so why do you harbor so much enmity toward me?" Han Li asked in a cold voice. At the same time, a layer of azure flames surfaced along the large azure hand, instantly reducing the streak of fiery light into nothingness. "There seems to be a misunderstanding, fellow Daoist Han. I have no intention of harming you. I'm merely attempting to express my gratitude toward you for saving my daughter all those years ago." The masked woman fell silent for a moment before a smile suddenly appeared on her face. The heavy atmosphere within the palace was suddenly relieved with her words. "Daughter, could it be that fellow Daoist Ling is?" Han Li faltered slightly before an enlightened look appeared on his face. His expression also eased in response. He knew that this woman's true intention clearly wasn't to express gratitude to him, but he decided to diffuse the situation by playing along with her lies. Han Li didn't consider it to be a problem to engage a late nascent soul cultivator in battle. After all, he had slain late nascent soul cultivators in the past, and now that he had progressed to that cultivation base himself, he was far more powerful than he once was. However, at the same time, he was not interested in making enemies everywhere he went. Furthermore, he was currently situated in the Heavenly Star City and was naturally rather wary of the divine essence-fused light. "It seems you've already guessed it. Yuling is our only daughter, and if it weren't for your help all those years ago, she would have most likely perished already. My Tao companion and I have always been very grateful toward you," the masked woman said in a warm voice. "No wonder fellow Daoist Ling's aptitude is so exceptional. It makes sense that she's the daughter of the Heavenly Star Sages." Han Li smiled in response. "Surely you jest, Brother Han. In terms of cultivation aptitude, no one is a match for you. You've progressed from the core formation stage to the late nascent soul stage in less than 200 years. That's simply unheard of. No one has been able to cultivate at such a phenomenal rate in the history of the human world. Yuling cannot compare to you." The masked woman chuckled as she shook her head. She was very stunned by Han Li's insane rate of progression, and was trying to indirectly prompt him to reveal how he had made such extraordinary strides. Han Li could naturally read between the lines and sense the indirect questions being posed, but he merely gave an ambiguous smile and didn't speak any further on this topic. "I've heard a lot about the two Heavenly Star Sages and I would love to have a good chat with you, but I still have important matters to attend to, so I'm afraid I can't stay any longer. I would like to use the Star Palace's teleportation formation. You don't mind, do you?" Han Li glanced at the teleportation formation before turning back to appraise the masked woman. "Of course not. I have a guest elder badge here that you can take if you'd like. I know that with your status, you wouldn't actually want to become a guest elder at the Star Palace. This is just something that I'm lending to you on behalf of my Tao companion and myself. With this badge, you'll be able to summon and use all of the resources of the Star Palace in the outer seas. Please accept it as a gesture of our gratitude." The masked woman immediately accepted Han Li's request and pulled out a shiny golden badge from a storage pouch hanging from her waist, which she tossed toward him. Han Li was rather surprised by this gesture, and he reflexively caught that golden badge being tossed at him. He examined the badge with a cursory glance before replying, "Thank you for your hospitality." After a brief hesitation, Han Li placed the badge into his storage pouch. A hint of elation flashed through the masked woman's eyes upon seeing him accept the guest elder badge. She then took this opportunity to say, "When you return from the outer seas, my Tao companion and I want to extend a formal invitation for you to come join us at our cultivation spot and discuss some experiences on our paths to the deity transformation stage. Would you be interested in that?" Deity transformation stage? I've only just progressed to the late nascent soul stage, and I would love to exchange cultivation experiences with cultivators of the same level, but my top priority is to fortify my cultivation base for now. However, if I do get the chance, I would visit you and your Dao companion for sure. Han Li contemplated momentarily before turning down her invitation with an apologetic expression. Late nascent soul cultivators were extremely rare in the human world, and to be able to hold a discussion with such cultivators was indeed a rare opportunity. However, he didn't want to plunge himself into a perilous situation for this opportunity. With his current power level, he was confident that he would be able to take on several late nascent soul cultivators at once and emerge from the battle unscathed. However, that didn't mean that there was nothing in the human world that could pose a threat to him aside from deity transformation cultivators. If he weren't careful, he could be trapped in an ancient restriction, so some kind of powerful large-scale formation spell. If he were to be attacked by late nascent stage cultivators in that situation, the outcome may not fall in his favor. Thus, he immediately decided to euphemistically turn down her invitation to visit their cultivation spot. A hint of disappointment appeared on the masked woman's face upon hearing this. As for whether she actually harbored ulterior motives in the invitation that she had extended to Han Li, even she couldn't be sure of that herself. However, seeing as Han Li had turned her down, she was naturally not going to force the issue. Instead, she merely moved on to other conversation topics and continued to chat amicably with him. Han Li gave a few polite responses before taking his leave. The masked woman didn't try to stop him. Instead, she stepped away to the side, allowing him access to the teleportation formation. At the same time, she drifted away even further into the distance as a gesture of reassurance to Han Li, indicating that she wasn't going to disrupt his teleportation. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face, and he paid this no heed as he strode on ahead. The two-star palace cultivators hurriedly stepped aside in a respectful manner, granting Han Li free passage to the teleportation formation. However, as they did so, the core formation stage couple and their disciples were revealed to him. The graceful man didn't dare to say anything, either, and he immediately tried to drag his daughter away to get out of Han Li's path. However, to his surprise, the core formation stage woman with whom he had been happily married for over 100 years suddenly made her way over to Han Li, before extending a respectful bow. Wen Xiue pays her respects to Senior Han. Congratulations on progressing to the late nascent soul stage, Senior. If it weren't for your help all those years ago, I wouldn't be standing here today. This core formation stage cultivator was none other than the woman who had almost become Han Li's servant in the outer star seas, Wen Xiue. Xiue. You recognize this Senior? The graceful man was rather flabbergasted. Han Li turned toward the woman and said calmly, "Long time no see. I see you've also reached the core formation stage. Looks like you haven't been slacking off with your cultivation. Otherwise, with your aptitude, it would have been slightly difficult for you to reach this stage. It's all thanks to the pills you left for me, Senior. Otherwise, I would have never reached the core formation stage." Wen Xiue replied in a respectful manner. "Your father and I are old acquaintances, so it was only right for me to help you out. You don't need to thank me. You look like you're in a hurry to get to the outer seas as well. Let's go together. This woman is an acquaintance of mine. You wouldn't mind if I took these people with me to the outer seas, would you?" Han Li turned and asked the masked woman. "Of course not. Feel free to take them with you," the masked woman replied without any hesitation. "You have my thanks." Han Li nodded and didn't say anything further to Wen Xiue. Instead, he merely raised a leg and somehow appeared in the teleportation formation after taking just a single step. He had clearly just employed the distance minimization technique that only late nascent soul cultivators were capable of unleashing. Wen Xiue and the others were all startled to see this before turning to Han Li with awe and veneration in their eyes. Only the thin and frail young woman's eyes lit up with curiosity as she looked at Han Li. Han Li cast a celestial technique toward the edge of the formation before pulling out his greater teleportation medallion. Just as white light began to glow within the formation, he turned to the masked woman with a smile and asked, "By the way, I don't seem to have learned your name yet. Would you be so kind as to disclose it to me?"
My Name is Wayne Peng.
The masked woman was slightly taken aback by this question initially, but she still replied with a smile. Right in this instant, Han Li and the others disappeared amid the white light, and it was unknown whether he had heard her response or not. The smile on the masked woman's face immediately disappeared. She said in a frosty voice, "For granting them access to the teleportation formations, both of you will receive 20 lightning whiplashes each as a punishment. If you dare to do this again, I won't be so kind. Thank you for sparing our lives, Palace Master. We definitely won't ever do it again." The two petrified Star Palace cultivators were both horrified and elated upon hearing the punishment dictated by the woman. They were elated as the punishment was a lot less severe than they had thought it would be, but also horrified in that 20 lightning whiplashes would most likely make them bedridden for an entire month. After delivering this verdict, a flash of light erupted from the masked woman's body and she disappeared on the spot.